Welcome to the Clean Hits Hockey Podcast. I'm your host, Brad. We got Clean Hits Corey, and we have our special guest and friend of the show, Brogan Houston from the Deseret News, joining us today. Guys, I can feel it. It's coming. The dog days of summer are approaching, but we still have some exciting news to talk about. Development camp just wrapped up. Jack McBain just signed a big fat contract that should hopefully allow him to fix that hot tub. And there's still a lot of little offseason tidbits to kind of discuss. So, of course, we had to bring in Brogan to just kind of get some more insight, get a different opinion on some of these topics. Brogan, how are you doing? I heard that it's getting pretty hot up in Salt Lake right now, even though it's nothing compared to what I'm dealing with.
Yeah, no, I can't complain too much. I'm not in Arizona, with that heat, but it's pretty hot here, and I like it. It's gives us a chance to get outside and soak up some rays while we still can. And I know it's going to be back to cold in a couple months, so gotta enjoy it.
Yeah, we got a like 3 more months. It gets nice out here. But Corey, how are you doing?
Yeah, same deal. We just had the kind of a heat wave here, but take advantage of it while it's here because we know, October-ish starts to get cold, time around hockey season. So let's just take advantage of the non-hockey weather while we have it.
Yeah, that sounds great. That sounds fantastic. It'll be in the 90s here until like November. So, well, the big news here is Jack McBain's new contract, and this. Initially, the tag seemed a bit high, but we are in a brand new cap era, and it's something that we all got to get used to kind of seeing. I think the big piece here is that he is locked up for 5 years at an average cost of $4.25 million. I'm sure he is having a fantastic offseason with that new contract. But I think Bill Armstrong is probably just as excited to have his mini-me locked up for a good portion of what's going to be the team kind of turning around, knocking at the playoff doors, if not making it outright season after season. And McBain is the exact type of role player you want for those hard, heavy games that will be coming in April. Brogan, what were your initial reactions when the news broke?
Yeah, my first thought was he got the term and the dollar value. I was thinking he was going to get one or the other. Maybe like a 5-year term at like $3 million a year, or maybe that 4.5, $5 million for 2 years or something like that. I didn't expect him to get both, which good for him. Like he earned that money. It's his. That's great for him. But I do think it's a little bit of that Sam Bennett syndrome. Like everybody's pointing at the big physical mean players now and saying, hey, that's what you need to win the Stanley Cup. And Jack McBain, he provides a lot of that. He's not quite as offensively minded as Sam Bennett is, but he did have a really good stretch at the beginning of the season where I want to say he had, 8 or 9 goals in those first couple months of the season, which, great for a third liner to get that. And I think with that kind of money, you're expecting him to probably push for a top 6 spot rather than a middle 6. So good for him, but he's gonna need to definitely show that he's worth that. Otherwise, that's how quickly the fans can turn on you if you make too much money for what you're worth.
Yeah, and I think he brings enough of kind of the intangibles and the other side of hockey that there's always going to be some sort of value in that contract. He's been very consistent for his point totals throughout his 3 full years in the NHL with 26 points, 26 points, and 27 points. This year, he had his career best of 13 goals. 2 seasons ago, he had 12 goals, and his last season with the Arizona Coyotes, he had 8 goals. But this is a guy who is in the top 5 for hits, the top 5 for fights in the league. And with a younger core, I think this is somebody who's going to be very vital. I was talking with a friend about this a little bit. I think one big aspect here that separates him from, let's say, a Frederick who just got paid long term, is the fact that he's kind of homegrown. Yes, he was drafted by the Minnesota Wild, but he never played in the NHL with the Wild. He was the player who wanted that opportunity and didn't see it on the Wild's roster and asked out. Bill Armstrong goes out and makes the trade for him, and takes the risk of moving a second round pick for him. And so far it's all turned out, at least the value of that pick and what we received from that player. And now having him as pretty much part of the core for the next 5 years and at least 8 years total for this team seems like a good return for the trade standpoint here. I'm really not too concerned with this contract. And I like that we bought 2 years of free agency here. Yes, I'm curious to see how all the dominoes fall, though, when a guy like Hayton is going to need a new contract, which will be coming up this year. And then a guy like Keller down the road, while some of the younger core pieces like Tej, Simashev, and Boot start getting big games and potentially needing kind of their bridge deals as well. Corey, any thoughts on that?
On Barrett Hayton, I wonder if you almost try and sneak in an extension this summer. Now, I don't imagine he's going to want to sign it this summer. He's probably going to want to have one really big year before that, but that would be nice to get that done, that and Logan Cooley. Jack McBain, though, I think Brogan's bang on there with the Sam Bennett effect. You look at the type of players who excel in the playoffs, and Jack McBain, once we do get to the playoffs, is going to be a player that excels. And if you contrast him against a player like Matias Machelli, who just got moved out, salaries are fairly similar. Machelli's making about 3.4 and McBain at 4.25. Probably best case scenario for McBain, you're looking at 40 points, which that's like absolute best case scenario. And Machelli, really, if he's playing a top 6 role, his floor should be 40 points. But you get to the playoffs, and which one of those players is going to be more effective? Mattias Machelli, we saw it this past season. If he's not in a scoring role, he's not particularly effective. Can't even get a spot in the lineup. So I think, like I said earlier, Brogan's bang on there with getting a playoff player here in Jack McBain.
Yeah, and again, I think that's going to be more and more important further down the stretch in the regular season and in the playoffs, obviously. And a big component here is kind of that versatility that McBain brings. Being able to play both wing and center will help quite a bit with, mixing and matching lines. If there's injuries, being able to move McBain up to the second line will be very beneficial as well. We saw him spend some time with Cooley and Gunther at the start of last season, and he actually was having quite a bit of success there. Now, he was playing a little bit of a different role there, and I think that's where he kind of had that goal surge. But again, if Schmaltz isn't a great fit for JJ Peterka, maybe it's McBain that goes up there, and then we get Schmaltz, I don't know, on the third or first line. There's lots of elements to McBain that allows him to be more than just kind of that punishing 3C or that punishing 4C, and I do think that is illustrated with the contract that he just received.
Do you see him as more of a center or as a wing? I'd like him more on the wing. Great size for center, but I think also great size on the wing, more of a banger there. And like you said, we saw he had some good chemistry. I think they were calling it the kid line last year with Dylan Gunther and Logan Cooley. But yeah, I like him a lot better on the wing. And I do think we still need one more ad at center if we are not putting him at center.
I don't disagree, but that may not happen for another 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
Centers are just so hard to find. So it may be just one of those situations where, we could find maybe a 4C, whether that's kind of the leftovers of free agency or a guy who gets cut by a team after a younger player takes their spot. But outside of trading for an actual two-way solid 3C, I don't think it's going to be as easy to come by as it used to be a couple years ago, where it seemed like overpaid 3Cs were the equivalent of skillsy, zippy wingers that don't play much of a two-way game. So I don't know.
Barrett Hayton, even if he doesn't take another step this year, and I'm not really anticipating him to get more than 45, 50 points. Even if he does that number again, he's going to get upwards of $7 million next year just because of the rising cap, and centers are in such demand. And then you look at the other pieces of Hayton's game as well, right? Good size, and he's pretty irritating to play against too. So
yes. Yeah.
I will say one thing. It can be kind of enticing to go out and get all these kind of depth players, and it's only $4.5 million or $4.25 or whatever, for a McBain kind of guy. But one thing with that is if you get too many of those guys and not enough of them pan out, all of a sudden you've committed a lot of money into guys that didn't really pan out for you. You guys probably know I grew up a Canucks fan, and in my vintage of the Canucks era, there was Antoine Roussel, there was Jay Beagle, there was
Louis Eriksson,
Brandon Sutter.
We inherited them all.
Louis Eriksson,
the OEL special,
yeah, right? Louis Eriksson, I think, is a different category. He was supposed to be more of a top six guy, and it just didn't pan out. But they gave term to these bottom six forwards: Beagle, Roussel, Brandon Sutter, and there's probably 3 or 4 others that I'm missing. And all of a sudden, the Canucks had to trade them all to Arizona because they ran out of cap room and they weren't going to be able to sign every guy that they needed to sign. And it wasn't one of those players that was the issue. It was all of them combined. And so I think that this McBain deal in a vacuum is okay, but I do think that if you stack a couple of those on, you're getting into pretty dangerous water. And there's no coming back from that. That's when teams throw you an anchor and they say, "Here, take Oliver Ekman-Larsson from us, and we'll take you through bad contracts." That's kind of what happens.
Yeah. Now, I will say this: McBain will be turning 26 in January, where a lot of those long-term contracts for the Canucks on those players, I think Beagle and Russell and the crew, the likes, were probably in their late 20s, early 30s when they signed some of those initial contracts. So, this may be one of those situations where once McBain hits free agency, he walks or has to take a discount to stay on this team. And the other thing, and I was bringing this up a little bit before, players like McBain, I think, have better success the longer they are on the team, especially if they're kind of that homegrown guy. Because if they're the ones that are going in there and dropping the gloves to protect one of their players, you better believe it means a lot more when that's, their roommate doing it, or that's the guy that goes out and hangs out at Park City and goes bowling every weekend with those players, rather than some guy who got just shipped in from Boston and doesn't really know anybody that well. So I like that standpoint here of having that big brother who's going to kind of defend you for multiple years. Now, the guy that will kind of bleed. I think BA's old quote was bleed
in the desert,
and bleed in the desert, but now it's bleeding in the Wasatch. Yeah. So I'm not terribly concerned about this contract long term. I'm not terribly concerned about what it will mean when we do need to sign more players to longer term contracts as well. Obviously, Cooley's coming up, Hayton, and then Keller down the road a little bit, because we're going to have that influx of ELCs as well. So I think
surprisingly close to the cap, though.
We are right now.
We've never said that before. Usually fighting.
Well,
to the floor.
I mean, we have when it was like the likes of Shea Weber and all the LTR players, but
yeah, we have about $10 million if you get creative. But yeah, we've never been that close to the cap before.
Yeah, but again, I mean, there'll be people coming off the books, and we are getting to the point where it's going to be a little bit of a juggling act, and I think it's fair to say that at some point here, you may point at McBain's contract. I think there's worse ways to spend the cap. And I think McBain's the type of player that, even if he has a stretch of games where he's not producing with points, he's at least producing with all the physicality he brings. So,
yeah, like if you look at our cap right now, like if you looked at it last year and you had to point to what was the most problematic contract, it was probably Machelli because he wasn't producing for what he was paid. Yep. And then this year, I don't really see a number. I mean, if you had to pick one, maybe a loss at Krause because, again, like Machelli, you're looking for a little bit more offense there, but still $4.3 million for Krause on a cap that's eventually going to hit $114 million is such a low percentage.
Yeah. You teed that one up well. Why don't we talk about Machelli a bit? This is something we actually haven't really addressed on Clean Hits yet either. So Matias Machelli gets traded to Toronto, last week? I think the whole flurry with free agency, really kind of made it easy to kind of forget about this one. Personally, I think the return was fantastic. I mean, a third round pick. Granted, it would probably be a later third since it's Toronto, and you can expect them to be in the playoffs, if not making a deep run. But if he puts up 51 points, it turns into a second. Strange that it's 51 instead of just 50. But
good odds for that, though, I think.
I would say so, because this is a player who needs that top 6 minutes. And with Mitch Marner leaving the Maple Leafs, there's a open spot either playing with Austin Matthews and Matthew Nyes or John Tavares and William Nylander, who both sets of those lines should be able to help Machelli propel up to that number. I think this is a fantastic fit for Toronto, to be honest. I think they are getting a bargain here.
Moneyball Marner.
I wouldn't be surprised if Machelli can be putting up 60 points or so with them, but that opportunity wasn't happening in Utah. So for the picks that we will be receiving for it, it feels pretty good. Now,
I'd agree with that. I would say to all these Toronto fans, Corey, maybe you can send this clip to a bunch of people, out there in your neck of the woods. But Toronto fans, I've seen nothing but, Machelli's the Marner replacement. Oh, he's going to be the next Mitch Marner. He's going to come in and automatically score 90 points, 100 points. It's not going to be like that. He is probably a 60 to 70 point player at his absolute peak. But he doesn't provide. Yeah, exactly. With Austin Matthews on your wing. He doesn't, though, provide the same two-way game that Mitch Marner provided. Mitch Marner killed a ton of penalties, and he was good at both ends of the ice. Matias Machelli does not really play in his own end of the ice that much. Like he doesn't have that two-way component to his game, and he's not quite as elite offensively as Mitch Marner is. So, you still downgraded. Obviously, I don't think that's a hot take. But I do think it's time to just cool it off just a little bit, because if you come in expecting this guy to be the next Mitch Marner, you're going to be disappointed, and then he's going to be all mad, and he's going to request a trade again, and he's going to go somewhere else, and we'll repeat the cycle. So just make sure that those expectations aren't as high as they sometimes are in markets like Toronto.
I think the only other piece I'd add to that too is Marner will shoot the puck a lot more than Machelli will. Marner could get 30 goals. Machelli, I would be shocked if he breaks 20. And I do think he's got a good chance to break that 51 condition, but that could also be dependent on the health of Austin Matthews. So if he's not setting up Matthews, Nylander. Yeah. So we'll see. He's also never played in a market like Toronto. So soon as the Toronto faithful get a more full understanding of the player that Machelli is, and that he will often refuse to shoot the puck, I can see him not necessarily becoming a bit of a whipping boy, but there's going to be some frustrations with this player for sure.
Definitely. Yeah. And you bring up the media as well. I think he's probably in for some culture shock there. He didn't often want to talk, even when there were 3 or 4 people in the locker room trying to talk to him. When you go to Toronto, all of a sudden you have dozens of people in the locker room trying to talk to you every single day. I just wonder how that'll play out. That's all.
And you mentioned he requested a trade, and we saw that as well from David Pagnotta with the fourth period. Is that something that's been lingering for a while? Because we saw him scratched for pretty much the second half of the season. I don't know if he was in a bit of a doghouse there with Coach Andre Tourné, but obviously maybe from his standpoint, he saw the writing on the wall that it was, his career was not going to continue in Salt Lake.
Yeah, no, he made it known that he, didn't want to be there anymore. And, we'd go and talk to him and he'd voice his frustrations directly to us. And it was often, like I'd ask him like, when was the last time that you got scratched, for a few games in a row? And he'd be like, oh, I've never been scratched. Like this, this has never happened before. That kind of stuff. Like he was very clearly frustrated. And a lot of the time it was, pretty evident in his answers, like, oh, I can't wait to get out of here, or I don't want to be here, that kind of thing. Not because he doesn't like Utah, but because he wasn't playing, he was watching from the press box every game. And so I just think that it was time for a change no matter what, and I'm happy for him that he can go somewhere where he'll be really respected there. But I do think that it was just kind of a stylistic thing. He's a smaller guy. He wasn't producing the way that they expected him to produce, and then they put him on the bottom lines, and he's not a bottom line player who can't really fill that role. So I think Toronto's a good place for him in that sense.
Yeah, and he was a bit of a fan favorite toward the end there in Arizona, but with the move to Utah and the emergence of some of the younger players like Dylan Guenther, obviously less opportunity in the top six. And as you mentioned, you put him in the bottom six, and he's not on the PK. He's not going to get power play time if he's not in those higher lines. And the minutes sunk, and with that, so did the numbers as well. So.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with all that. And I'm about to just make one beautiful transition here. So when we were talking about Mitch Marner with all the rumors that maybe he would be a good fit for Utah because the team had the cap, there's a lot of conflicting opinions, or some people thought it was the perfect fit. Others, maybe not so much. I was a little bit on the side of, yes, he's going to be able to bring a ton of points. Is that what this team needs? And that is because Marner is more of that skillsy player. Yes, he is much better two-way than somebody like Machelli, but, isn't necessarily known for his physicality or anything. In comes Peterka, who is a little bit more of a goal scorer, a natural goal scorer. Similarly, maybe not the best two-way player, but you're getting a younger offensive dynamo, let's just say, for probably about $5 million less than what Marner ended up with at Vegas. And I have a feeling if he were to have signed with Utah, it may have been for a little bit more, just because the team doesn't have the same pedigree quite yet. What was your kind of initial reaction when the Peterka trade got announced? Because the one thing that does sting is the culture players that we did lose with Michael Kesselring and Josh Down. And you kind of compound that with Machelli leaving. And it does feel like kind of these three guys that were there at the end of the Arizona days that seemed to be really beloved in the locker room are now out, and we bring in definitely a type of top six forward that this team needed, because they ended up 22nd in goals for per game. Needed to get back into kind of that mid-range area to be a true playoff contender in my mind. JJ Peterka definitely helps that, but there's a cost to it.
Yeah, no, I think he will be able to come in and grow with this core, and I think that's a huge piece. We all know how much they needed a couple extra goals here and there last year. They had so many one goal losses and overtime losses and that kind of thing.
Yep.
So he will certainly come in and fill that role. But I think the more important thing is that he will fill that role for the next 5 years, and probably even after that as well, along with Dylan Guenther and Logan Cooley and Clinton Keller and all these other young guys, so that these guys can grow up together. And then by the time they're ready to reach the playoffs, they're all kind of in their prime all simultaneously. So I think that's the big thing here. is Bill Armstrong wasn't going to go out and get a 29-year-old that scored 70 points last year. He was looking for a 23-year-old or something in that era, in that age range. And so I think in that sense it's a great pickup. I still think they need a little bit of size up front, but who knows, maybe Daniil Boot or somebody like that can come in and do that within the next couple of years.
Brogan, do you put much stock into, the Marner rumors that were connecting him to Utah? We also saw the national media connecting Utah to Aaron Ekblad, not Sam Bennett, Brad Marchand, and I think there was one other big name as well. Or do you think that was just national media looking at the new team, looking at that point a team that had a lot of cap space and just kind of putting two pieces together?
Yeah, I think it was a lot of snowball effect. Like, a couple times throughout the year, like an Elliot Friedman or somebody would mention like, oh, hey, Utah has a lot of cap space. Maybe they go after Marner. And then everybody else says, oh, Utah's going to go after Marner. Okay. And, then all of a sudden there's all this reporting going on and it just becomes this giant snowball. If you listen to what Bill Armstrong said, consistently in every press conference, every time I talk to him individually, every time he'd say, I'm not going to go out and get a 29-year-old and sign him to a 7-year deal. Not going to do that. And he said it for a while. I know it was fun to play the Sam Bennett game. It was fun to play the Mitch Marner game. But it was never realistic. He always said he wasn't going to do it. We shouldn't have been surprised on free agency day when the biggest signing was Nate Schmidt. That's what he said he was going to do, and that's what he did.
Yeah, and to be completely fair here, a lot of the media was saying that Utah felt like a team that was going to make a splash, and they rightfully did. and this is a team that and it's easy to be like, oh, they didn't get Marner, so that splash didn't happen. No, they got a very young, potential 70+ point winger for the next 5 years, and yes, they moved assets for it, but that's how you acquire these types of players. Look at how Sam Reinhart was acquired by Florida, or even Matthew Tkachuk. And sometimes you move guys that you may consider core players, but you got to pay to play.
Mm-hmm.
Another forward in the top 6 that has been getting kind of called out in rumors is Nick Schmaltz. And this is a player that seemingly has been in the rumor mill for, I don't know, feels like at least 2 seasons now.
He's like our John Gibson, basically.
Yeah.
Yes. And while I still think he has a very good fit on the team, being one of the more playmaking first wingers, has some good skill in the neutral zone as well. His contract does end at the end of the season. Do you foresee this being kind of hang on to Schmaltz, let him stay with the team and help with the offensive production and let him walk? Or do you think there's actually any kind of truth to maybe some of these rumblings?
The one thing that I do know about Schmaltz is that he's probably among the top underrated players in the league. He doesn't get enough attention for how good he actually is. I know he had that goal scoring drought to begin the year, but he was still a point per game player roughly in that stretch where he didn't have any goals. He's a playmaker. Like, that's what he does. And then he still, ended up, reaching career highs in points and whatnot this year. And he's a good player on the ice. And so, I think that people that are out there, I've seen people saying like, oh, like we got to dump that contract, or we got to find somebody, we got to pay somebody to take the contract, or we got to buy him out, that kind of thing. I think that's the craziest stuff I've ever heard. That's bona fide top 6 player. If Utah gets to a position, in the springtime when they realize, oh, we're not going to make the playoffs. Okay, then, he's got 1 year left on his deal. Well, that's when you ship him out, and you can probably get a first round pick for a guy like that for, if you send him to a Vegas type of contending team, that needs a solid winger. Now, as far as an extension, I haven't talked to Nick about it or any management, so I don't know if he is planning on extending or if anybody, if there's anything there. But I wouldn't be surprised. Like he fits in really well with this lineup, as well as in that locker room. There's a lot of guys in there that, he's always always seems to have an inside joke with somebody, sitting next to him. He's really good friends with Clayton Keller. So I wouldn't be surprised if he wanted to come back. But I haven't had that conversation yet.
Yeah, it doesn't make much sense to me to move him right now. If you're bringing in Peterka and his 70 points, and then you're moving out Schmaltz's 60, you've only gained 10, depending on what you get back for Schmaltz. Now, if you can move him for a center, even if it's like a Barrett Hayton 45-ish point center, I think that makes sense. But, I'm more inclined to keep Schmaltz right now, make the playoffs, and then, keep him. They call it an own rental if you keep your own guy and don't move him at the deadline. And then he walks in the summer. So you lose him for free, but you also gain back his $6 million in cap and create a space on the roster next year when TJ Ginla is going to be pushing for a spot and some of the other young players as well.
Yeah, I agree. And I'm very proud of your restraint there, Corey, for not mentioning
I was thinking it
for a center. yeah, for somebody named Marco Rossi. Brogan. So the two big acquisitions at free agency were Brandon Tanev and Nate Schmidt. I know you just wrote an article for the Deseret on Tanev. You also wrote some pieces on Simishev and JJ Peterka. So if you haven't checked those out, please do. You can find all of Brogan's written work on the Deseret News. But what were your thoughts on these two signings? Personally, and I'm not going to try to tee you up too much here, I was very, very happy, 2 thumbs up with both of them.
As somebody that needs really good quotes to kind of, get good attention in the media and that kind of stuff, I'm really happy. These are 2 guys that will, be content factories all day long. So I love that part of it. And then they're just solid veteran guys. They'll keep it light in the room, which I think they could have used a little bit more of that last year. Seemed like they might have taken losses just a little too hard. And so, I think a guy like Nate Schmidt and Brendan Tanev, for that matter, they've been around long enough to know, like, here's what you do, here's what you don't do. This one is the end of the world. That one, like this loss is the end of the world. That loss is not. So, weigh them like that. And so I think both of those guys will come in, make it a little lighter. Just be great personalities. As far as the logjam now on defense, I was surprised to see a guy of Schmidt's caliber commit to Utah, just because, the left side, he's the 4th left shot defenseman that will probably be in the NHL the entire year now on that team. So somebody's going to move over to the right. I bet it's Olimata probably. But then you still got Marino and Jersey over there. And then what do you do with Lamoureux? What do you do with Simishev? What do you do, with even guys like Zuber, who might, be ready to make that next step sometime soon. So I am kind of just wondering how that works out. I didn't even mention Nick DeSimone. I wonder if he's even going to get to play this year. We'll see how that pans out. But, so I do wonder on the ice what the Schmidt, what's happening with Nate Schmidt there. I wonder if it's an injury, but Bill wouldn't say anything, so I don't know that for sure. Maybe John Marino still hasn't recovered fully from what he was dealing with at the end of the year last year. We'll see. But I think that those are great depth signings, great veteran guys, good in the locker room for sure.
Well, and we did move out Michael Kesselring, so there was a spot that was eaten up by a roster player before signing Nate Schmidt. So I think there's definitely some lessons learned last year with the injuries the team sustained. So it definitely seems like BA went heavy on the insurance policy this time around. Maybe paying a little extra for those warranties just in case. Now, on the flip side, for the forward depth, it feels like we just did a 180 from last season. Last season, we had Carcone, Machelli, Liam O'Brien as kind of the guys who would rotate in and out. Not to mention the fact that Yamamoto, as you broke during training camp, had really turned heads and got himself a contract. Now we have Yamamoto, who re-signed with the team, but it sure feels like there's either a spot to gain by maybe Daniil Boot or maybe even Iginla impressing enough. Otherwise, it feels like we're fairly thin on forward. Do you get the impression that maybe Armstrong's hoping to be able to pull from that pool of younger players that will be on the Roadrunners next season, or hoping that Iginla Boot just make that jump right out of training camp. Was there anybody maybe from even development camp that really turned some heads and maybe had a little bit of a buzz going?
Yeah, I do think it's hard to judge NHL talent off of development camp just because most of those guys coming in are, 18 years old and they're not NHL players. And so it's easy for Dmitry Simashev to absolutely wreck everybody there because he's the only NHL caliber player. I do wonder, though, about Cole Baudouin. I'll throw him into that mix with Iginla and Boot there. I think that if he does certain things well enough during training camp, he might be able to make the team out of camp. Maybe he goes back to the OHL and then eventually comes and plays games towards the end of the year. I would not be surprised to see him in a Mammoth uniform at some point during the regular season. Daniil Boot does seem raw still. I don't know that he's NHL ready. Maybe he'll prove me wrong in training camp. We'll see. Just watching him in development camp, it just seemed like he was at the same level as everybody else. He wasn't above everybody else enough to probably put him into a big role in the NHL, in my opinion. We'll see.
Yeah.
And then TJ Ginla, I just think because he lost almost the entire season last year, that's a year of development that he just didn't have. So this might have to count as his draft plus 1 year rather than his draft plus 2 year. So, I'd be surprised if he did anything but play in the WHL this year. But again, that's just kind of my thoughts on it. We'll see. And then there's a few guys that I wouldn't be surprised from the Roadrunners to come and see them play games this year. I think Owen Allard should be in that conversation. He's very, very got a head on his shoulders. That kind of a guy, like very intelligent. And he knows that he's going to be a bottom 6 guy in the NHL. He's told us that ever since the day I first met him. He said, "Yeah, I'm going to be a bottom 6 guy. Like that's what I'm working towards. That's my goal, that kind of thing." So, if they need somebody to fill in one of those roles, he's there. And then Kyler Yamamoto, I always say if Kyler Yamamoto were the size of Lawson Krause, he would be Lawson Krause. Like he would be, somebody that is a bona fide NHLer that is in no danger of losing his job, probably gets paid $4 or $5 million. That's how good Kyler Yamamoto is. But because he's 5'6" or 5'7", whatever he is, he just kind of gets looked over in all these conversations. But he can still put the puck in the net. He's got a great attitude. He's a great guy to have around. And so I would love to see him get more NHL chances. But, again, he's only 5'8", whatever he is. So, we'll see if that happens, but he's there if they need him for sure.
Yeah. Brogan, one more thing I'm kind of curious about is, do you think Bill's done, or is this is the roster going toward the season, or is he still searching for maybe 1-2 more pieces for this group?
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised to see him add another one. I published an article yesterday with a few guys that I think could be on the radar. Jack Roslovic has got to be at the top of everybody's list if they're looking for forwards still. Great guy that can come in. I got to know him just a tiny little bit when Carolina was here. He was telling us a story of how he and his teammates, they all went to the Hogle Zoo here in Salt Lake City. And he was telling us funny stories, and he was just kind of entertaining the crowd rather than doing media interviews. And so I thought that was really cool. Somebody like that, great guy to bring in, and he can shore up that depth. But there's plenty of Yoel Kiviranta types of guys out there that could also come in. So I wouldn't be surprised to see somebody like that get another job, just if for no other reason, just then Phil likes to have a deep roster, and so we'll see.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about adding a centerpiece, and he can play center on the wing, and just to have that depth, right? I mean, not only because we need it, but injuries and stuff too.
Yeah, it does feel like maybe one more depth piece will really make the roster feel fairly comfortable and a little bit more insured for injuries. But as you mentioned, Brogan, I think some of those kids like Julian Lutz and Owen Allard could make some heads turn during training camp. And granted, they may not be on the roster day one, but I think if they can really show up and as you mentioned, play that role that they need to be playing on this team rather than trying to become a NHL superstar, they may be able to find a way to carve that niche out sooner rather than later. And we just had Allard on the show last week, and yeah, the kid seems bright. He seems like a sponge. Mm-hmm. He's quoting things that the development coaches have been teaching him on our interview, and I was really impressed with him. So we will definitely be rooting for him. And obviously, once training camp comes along, I think we'll have a little bit better understanding of which players have that opportunity to potentially make the roster or be kind of that first call up as well. So it'll be interesting to see how much depth we actually have. It'll be interesting to see if there's still a little bit of tinkering to be done, or if we have another tryout contract like Yamamoto had last training camp and find kind of a vet that is looking for that opportunity and goes and grabs it. But Brogan, thank you so much for joining us today. Good luck with the dog days of summer. We're almost there. It definitely starts to drag kind of near the end of July and into August, but we'll have to have you back on once training camp gets going to get all your observations. If you're not following Brogan Houston, you can find him on Twitter/X at Houston_Brogan. And you can find all of his written work at the Deseret News. Anything you want to plug as well?
Yeah, just basically you said it. Just, keep an eye on the Deseret News. I've always got stuff coming out all summer. I think some of the other media members are taking a break throughout the summer. I'll keep pumping out content. So if you're hungry, you know where to go. Deseret News.
Love it.
Fantastic. All right. Well, thanks again. And everybody else, you can find us at cleanhitshockey.com. You can join us at our Discord at discord.cleanhitshockey.com. And if you want some more Utah Mammoth swag, like my Donor Nation Logan Cooley shirt, you can find all of our t-shirt designs at shop.cleanhitshockey.com. Give us a like, give us a comment, give us a subscribe. That's a great way to help support the podcast. And we will catch you next time. Adios.